Thank you for that wonderful lecture. And it is a real pleasure for me to be up here with you, John, and respect your work a lot, and I'm a huge fan as a mom. And it's wonderful to have the time to talk with you about this really important piece of work that was published in 2024. And I believe I was talking to your editor, and it has sold over 3 million copies all around the world, which it's incredible. And, you know, I first read your book the summer of 2024. I was telling you earlier, a friend of mine that lives in Miami said, hey, it's the rage here among parents, and you need to read this. And I read it. It provoked a lot of emotions. One was fear, as I was sitting here again. I mean, I've reread it several times, and I use it as a blueprint sometimes. And, you know, as a parent, you get very anxious about, oh, my goodness, you know, the world is doomed. But the first feeling was gratefulness. I was very grateful that somebody had spent the time doing the work to research such an important topic and give society, parents, institutions, schools with the vocabulary, the evidence, and the insight to be able to act on it. And so we'll talk. I have a few questions on the social media crisis. But one thing that personally, as a parent, really shook me was the first crisis that we are overprotecting children in the real world. And I remembered growing up where I would spend a lot of time playing in the street with my friends. Some of them are here tonight for hours. I would, you know, walk to the bus station, take the bus for 30 minutes, walk for another 30 minutes, go play sports in the teams that I competed at, and then, you know, I would show up back in the house, maybe around lunchtime. But for all that time, my parents didn't know where I was, had no way to reach me. Today, as a parent, I feel like if I don't know where my child is at all times, I'm a negligent parent. And obviously, the phones are exacerbating this. But that summer that I read your book, I decided I would take our oldest daughter, Aitana, she was 9 turning 10 at the time, out of half of her extracurricular activities because I felt like, oh my God, she's overprogrammed and she has no time for structured play. So let's just do that. And I've been trying to do a little bit of that. And my first question is on this crisis. And you know, I want to know, do you think as standalone, I mean, one, do we talk enough about it? And you know, is it really important as a standalone crisis, or does it only really get compounded with the crisis on the digital world? And you know, you kind of went very fast through what can we do about it here, but I want to know, because on social media, which is hugely important, but it's very clear, right? You gave us a blueprint on what to do, but when we try to give our children more independence, is difficult because of, you know, because of how kind of society is structured at the moment. I tried to let my daughter walk back from school alone, and the school didn't let her, and the teacher showed up at my door and said, you know, you can't have your child leave premises unattended. An adult needs to pick her up, right? So,
yeah, and that was in Spain, you said, right?
And that was here. It's a British school, but it is here, and I live 5 minutes away from the school, right, in a residential neighborhood. So even as a parent, right, that's trying to give more independence, in big cities in particular, it seems to be a difficult thing to do.
That's right. Yes, it is two separate crises that are interlocking and related. What you said about feeling that it gave you the vocabulary and the concepts. I've heard this a lot from a lot of mothers, that it made them feel validated, that they knew something was wrong, but people weren't talking about it. There wasn't a clear action plan, and so they kind of had this. Like, felt something is deeply wrong here. And I think it was mothers more than fathers, because, you know, when the kid is very little and very physically close to the mother, and then they move away, when they're taken away by a device, I think my theory is that mothers they felt it more keenly than fathers did. Which is why all around the world it was mothers who immediately stood up, formed groups, started lobbying, started promoting legislation. So this was a crisis that the mothers of the world knew deep in their bones was real, was threatening their own children, and they were desperate for something to do about it. And that's why when the book came out, they went crazy. Like every mother's book group, it seems, you know, read the book and then took action. So it's totally thrilling.
Yeah.
Okay. Now and that's a very big piece of what's happening. On the overprotection, there weren't millions of mothers out there saying, I'm so worried that I'm overprotecting my child. Oh my goodness, we all have to let our kids, this is not something that they knew necessarily, that any of us knew necessarily. And so this one, it's been much harder to raise consciousness on. And, but it's exactly the same logic, you just laid it out, the collective action problem, that most of us older people, when you're after school, you go out and play, or on weekends, you're just out playing, and that's when your best memories happen. And you can do this. You can ask groups of older people, think of the most exciting, fun, memorable times, and then you say, raise your hand if you have one. How many of you that was happening on a screen? Zero, nobody. Those are not memorable things. And I worry that, my friends and I, we talk about crazy things we did when we were in high school or college. And I worry that young men today, when they're old, they're going to say, hey, you remember Fortnite game 43,226 when you were caught behind that bunker and I shot you out? And the guy's going to say, no, I don't remember that. And so the devices, the loss of childhood, so all that's really important. My point was this. My point was, we could count on if you send your kid out, there'll be kids out there to play with. But what you found was, what are you going to do? Send your kid out into the street? Go to a park? They're not kids in parks. If they are, they're playing with their parents. So it's a collective action problem, and that's why Lenore Skenazy and I created Let Grow, is to try to solve that collective action problem. So one of the ideas, I'll just lay it out here, one of the ideas on the slide is what's called a playborhood, a neighborhood but for play. And the simplest way to do that, without having to build playgrounds, without having to change traffic patterns, you just find 5 families that want to do it. And with kids, they don't have to be the same age even. And the kids just know, on Fridays, it's Playborhood Day. On Fridays, we decide, let's start at Maria's house, and then we'll go to Steve's house. Oh, and Billy has a ping pong table, and we'll go play, but let the kids decide. And so there are things that you can do, but it's really hard as one parent. Mm-hmm. It's really easy if you have a group of parents.
Mm-hmm. I loved, before moving on to the next question, I loved, one of the concepts I loved on the book that you didn't mention here, but maybe we can share with the audience, is the anti-fragility concept, right? Which as a parent, I felt gave me a framework to think about what I would allow and what I wouldn't. And maybe you want to elaborate on what that is for mammals.
Yeah, it's the most useful term that was in my previous book, The Coddling of the American Mind, La Transformación del Mente Moderno. If something is fragile, like a glass bottle, and if you give it to kids and they drop it, it will break, and that's not good. Nothing good happens. But if you give them plastic bottles, plastic is resilient, so if they drop a plastic bottle, it doesn't break, but it doesn't get better. And anti-fragility refers to systems that get better when you drop them, that get better when something goes wrong. And the classic example is the immune system. Many of us would like to protect our children from dirt and germs. We don't want our kids to get sick, so we want to sterilize everything. But the human immune system is anti-fragile. It requires the child to be exposed to dirt and germs, and actually even parasitic worms, it turns out. We evolved with parasitic worms. That's a whole other story. But if you protect your kids from all of that, they get autoimmune diseases. Their immune system doesn't develop properly. So think about it that way. And now with play, if you protect your kid from being excluded, if you have a rule, and my daughter, I think there was a rule that you in elementary school that you couldn't exclude anyone. Was that? There was a rule at the school. You cannot you can't have a club with 3 girls in it. You have to admit everybody. Really? Okay. Bring me a child who was never excluded in his or her life, and if I'm an employer, I don't want to hire that person. You have to have the human ability to deal with sometimes you're going to be left out. And so when you go through it, and it was painful, it hurts when you see your kid, it really hurts. And parents, we want to jump in. So I understand the urge to do it, but when you do it over and over again, that's how you block the development of their anti-fragility. And so it's the small risks. That's why being out with a group of friends on the playground, if you're not paying close attention, someone could get hurt. That's true, but you have to take that risk in order for them to grow and then have those memories of the exciting things that they did and how they dealt with the problems.
Absolutely, I love that example because that inclusiveness thing is a constant at school, and all the parents, kind of intervening to try to solve it, and the teachers. So another thing that was really striking and that you show a little bit was the differences between girls and boys and how they're impacted differently. I find that the impact of social media on girls is really scary. You see the curves here, right, really steep, and then particularly after COVID, rising very fast.
Yeah.
I feel like the antidote is also clearer for girls, which is delaying social media as much as possible. But could you talk a little bit about the difference with the boys and what do we do about the boys? Because it seems like it's not, social media is not so much the thing for them. Is it gaming? And I don't know if and what does the research say about that? So what do we do about them? And also one thing you didn't mention here, but I think I saw in the book that's super interesting also for parents is the age brackets at which they seem to be most impacted is also different. So if you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Sure. Yeah, so with social media, there are now 2 studies that have looked at when kids were using a lot of social media and what their mental health was, to try to find what are called developmental windows, periods of time when social media will have the biggest effect. And so the study I know best found that for girls it was 11 to 13. When girls were using social media between 11 to 13, that was the most likely period for them to become depressed. And boys, it was a little bit later, it was like 14 to 16. And boys start puberty later and finish puberty later, so that's probably why that is. We think puberty is probably the most important developmental window for your adult personality. The first 3 or 4 years are extremely important for brain development, but like who you are, your identity, like you really change from the child form to the adult form of a brain and person in puberty. And in every other society, in most traditional societies, that's exactly when the community takes over and says, okay, you just had your first period. So you're going to be a woman, and now you have a woman who's not the mother. Another woman is your guide, and she educates you, and she brings you into the knowledge you need. And for boys, it tends to be a lot rougher, a lot more physical, especially in warrior cultures. But it's not the father; it's a group of men who then socialize the boys and take them through from boy to man. That's the human plan. And what do? We've completely forfeited our duty to socialize other people's kids. In fact, in America at least, people are afraid to have anything to do with anyone else's kids because you might be accused of sexual assault. So we've severed that transmission of culture from one generation to the next. We put it all on the parents, especially on the mother. Oh, and that's exactly when we give them a smartphone and social media. So who is guiding I showed you those roots. Who is guiding the neural development? It's TikTok. TikTok gets to decide how our children's brains will be structured. The Chinese love that because their TikTok is all about astronauts and Chinese patriotism. Our TikTok is like people getting hit in the head with it's just stupid stuff.
So on a positive note, you talked about a lot of how the conversation has evolved, right? You really catalyzed the movement in 2024, and in many ways, policy is moving in the direction of the book and the direction you propose. Australia banned access to social media for under 16. The UK also approved a ban last month. Like you said, Spain and France considering it, other countries as well. What do you think about the bans? Is there any early evidence of whether they work? Because there's been a lot of talk about how difficult it is to enforce those bans and to just get around the age limits, right, that are in the apps.
That's right. So it's really hard to change behavior. You and I talked about this, and I'd worked in the for Mayor Bloomberg in New York City, who did a lot of social change efforts and got smoking out of bars. I mean, he did major social change efforts. It's really hard to change entrenched norms, especially when they're backed by addiction. So what are the odds that you could take a whole country full of 14 and 15-year-olds who've been on social media for 7 years, who are using it 3 to 5 hours a day, and suddenly make them stop? That's impossible. So if I told you that the Australia law, in the first few months, cut social media usage by 30%, or at least 30% of the kids are no longer have a social media account, would you say, wow, that's amazing? Or would you say, yeah, most kids are getting around it? And what the world seems to be doing now is saying, oh, most kids are getting around it, therefore it failed. And there was an interesting article by some really good researchers on how, well, if you don't hit 70%, at 70%, people look around, they say, oh, everyone's doing it, so then the norm sticks. and they pronounced that, well, since Australia didn't get 70%, it's going to fail. Which reminds me, I wrote The Happiness Hypothesis. There's a famous quote from the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu. He said, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, but if the first step is hard, you should quit." I'll wait for the translation to go through. Okay, so he did say the first part. The second part was added on by critics of the Australia social media bill. So, yes, it didn't work right away. And of course they can get, but the whole point of the Australia bill was to put the responsibility not on the state, not on the parents, on the goddamn companies that are addicting kids and making money from it. Just as if they were running casinos or alcohol serving places or anything else that was an adult activity. Put the responsibility on them. And that's what the law did. And they all complied, sort of. That was round one. And now they've collected evidence. Oh, most kids are still on. You're not doing a very good job. You have to do better. And now we're going to go into round two. So Australia did something really, really hard. But now that they've done it, guess what? There's now a market for age verification for kids. That wasn't really there before. And this industry, the tech industry, is so brilliant. Apple and Google have already introduced new products that make it much easier to do age verification. So I say, Spain, full speed ahead, learn from what Australia is doing, learn from what Indonesia is doing. There are a lot of different models out there now. Whatever you do, it's going to be a lot easier for you than it was for Australia. Thank God for Australia. We all owe them a debt because they did the hard, they just charged in, and they were the first. For everyone else, it's going to be easier. Plus, there's an emerging sense among kids, among everybody. You know what? The right age is 16. And so I think that's going to make it easier for families. When a 10-year-old says, "Mom, I need TikTok because my friend has TikTok," you can say, "Well, I'm sorry, the law says 16, so no, you can't have an account till you're 16." So I'm really excited about what the Australians did, what they've accomplished, and the fact that more than a dozen countries committed to following within 2 months of the Australia bill. So go Spain.
Do you see the tech companies in the US sort of reacting to the Australia ban, in addition to introducing new products for age verification? But you're mentioning this coincided also with sort of the lawsuit that was ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, right, that were complaining that Meta, I believe, had...
Yeah, that's right. So Meta and Apple have introduced a variety of new safety features. Meta tends to introduce them only when a bill is being considered in the US Congress that would regulate them. So there's clearly pressure on them because all these other countries have to decide which platforms are covered. And platforms that have dangerous features, like Roblox, is actually full of horrible stuff. It's not included in the Australia bill, but it is included in the Indonesia bill. Companies are now motivated to not have horrible stuff. If they change their design, they won't get caught by the age limits. I think the bigger pressure on the companies, though, is the lawsuits. Because if you make a dangerous consumer product that has killed thousands of people, you're going to be sued, and you have to change your product, like very, very quickly. Except if you're a tech company, then you can do whatever you want, and it's the parents' fault, or it's the kids' fault. So these companies have killed literally thousands of people. They have damaged, I think, hundreds of millions of people. And they've never had to pay a penny. They've never faced a jury, ever, until January, February. And they lost. And they lost so big, the jury said, yes, you deliberately designed your products to addict children. They lost so big that the insurance companies went to court in the state of Delaware and said, because Meta knew what it was doing, therefore, we don't have to pay their losses. So, and the judge said, you're right. Meta did this intentionally. Therefore, they have no insurance. And so these are going to be billions of dollars. It could be hundreds of billions of dollars just in the United States of damages. And Meta will have to pay that from shareholder money, not from insurance. So that, I think, is really putting pressure on them to do something.
Wow, that's incredible. And from a public policy perspective point of view, do you think there are other measures that governments can take at the different levels of government beyond kind of a general ban on social media? Because it strikes me that even if you have the privilege of, being at a school, well, from a parental point of view, there are now these sort of parent pacts or social contracts. I don't know if you have them at your school. For those that are parents, do you have parent pacts at the school, trying to get parents to agree on the age at which phones are handed out? Yes, raise your hand if you are in one of those schools. So I'm lucky enough to have my kids in one of those schools, but even at the school, even for a single class of only 22, 25 students, we can only get about 50% of the parents to agree to delay, as if they just don't want to commit. And, is 40% or 50% too much, too little? I don't know, but clearly we're not there yet, despite all of the evidence. So what else can...
Yeah, so I think there are 3 areas where public policy could have a big effect very quickly. One is, I think every government should treat this as a major public health campaign. And the biggest area where I think we're damaging kids is that it's normal now, maybe it's probably the same here, if you see someone pushing a stroller and either the kid is holding an iPad or there's an attachment to hold the iPad. It's normal, I hear different numbers, but I think it's 40% of either 2-year-olds or 4-year-olds. I've heard different numbers. Let's be conservative. 40% of 4-year-olds in the United States and the UK have their own iPad. It's normal. And this is perhaps the most damaging thing we're doing. When you talk to teachers in first grade or elementary school or early grades, they all say the same thing. We're seeing kids showing up, language delays, behavioral problems. They're not potty trained. And they can tell. These are the kids who have to be on devices all the time. So I'm not saying it should be illegal for a parent to give an iPad to a 2-year-old, but it should be seen as like giving them a cigarette. And that's going to take a public health campaign because it doesn't feel wrong. Like he's all upset and I give him the iPad and he's happy. So it doesn't feel wrong, but it is wrong. And so I think we need a major public health campaign. And then if you do that, then over a couple of years, you're not going to have that problem, that 40% problem. After a couple of years, when everyone is hurt, because when we hear something from one place and it's going to make us do something different, we can dismiss it. When you start hearing it from 4 or 5 places, now it's just this is what everyone is saying. So we have to approach all of this using social psychology to make people perceive that the social reality we're in is different than what we thought a year ago. So that's public health. The second big one is get all the computers and tablets out of school, especially off of their desks. Let's do what the tech barons do. The people who made this technology, they send their kids to schools like the Waldorf school specifically because there are no computers in the classroom. That's why they pick it. They don't let their kids use this stuff. They know how dangerous it is. The Waldorf school has a computer room. You can learn to program. But a laptop or a tablet is the most distracting thing ever invented. It should never be on a student's desk. I mean, there could be an activity where you put it on, but you take it right off. In America, we have one-to-one device policies. We thought it was an equity issue, a fairness issue. Rich kids have computers. Let's buy a computer for every kid so that every kid can learn on a computer. College professors like me, we're banning computers right and left. Our college students cannot learn well if there's a computer on their desk. So how can an 8-year-old learn? So there's, I think, public policy needs to be very aggressive. There was never any evidence that technology helped education. This stuff doesn't help, and there's increasing evidence that it's hurting. And then the third one is chatbots. Just the age there needs to be 18 for relational chatbots, character AI, anything like that. Now, of course, ChatGPT can be turned into a sexual partner if you just ask it a few questions and pretend you're writing a novel or something. So I can't say that we should ban ChatGPT for minors, but we need to understand these things are artificial creatures. They're artificial intelligences, and they're getting increasingly human, and people are falling in love with them. People are marrying them, literally having marriage ceremonies to their AI boyfriend and girlfriend. So how about we just don't give this to kids? That just seems such common sense. So those are the 3 areas I suggest.
Yeah, on the third one, I know that the Brookings Institution issued a report earlier this year, I believe, kind of borrowing on your language, the great rewiring, and they used the language, the great unwiring, right, to talk about sort of the cognitive atrophy that occurs when students cut corners with AI, with chatbots, sort of using ChatGPT to turn in your homework and to do your homework faster. And I guess with companions, it's relational atrophy. I guess you at some point start losing, the ability to understand the complexity of human relationships and empathy and all of these other things. I've never seen anybody in Spain or heard anybody in Spain using character AI, so hopefully it takes a little bit longer to arrive here, but definitely the chatbots. But then on that respect with AI, and you mentioned it briefly, but beyond the chatbots and the companions, right? Because do you think, I guess, this is an acceleration of social media, or is it a completely different threat? Because in some ways, AI is not just one thing, right? You have, on the one end, you have the chatbots and you have the companions that are scary for the reasons that we talked about. But on the other hand, you have tools like Lovable, right? Or Bolt or Replit or Cursor. These are tools that allow you to program in using plain English. So a student or an adult can now create products and have the tool programmed for them, right? By using instructions in English or Spanish or whatever the language is. And these tools are about building, right? I wonder, do you see any risks in those tools? Because the upfront investment that you need to make when you're building something is still significant, right? You need to think about what problem you want to solve and for whom and how you want to design it. It's an introduction to computer science, and and there's really kind of promotes the creation of abilities, right? So, So what how do we think about it?
Sure. What I hear over and over again is what could happen. Like they could do this. This could be the effect. Yeah, that could be the effect. But over and over again, what happens is usually much worse, and usually not what we were sold, not what we were told. Think about it this way. If you can give your child tools, oracles, or servants, which ones do you want to give them as they're growing up? Do you want your child to have access to tools or to oracle? I don't mean oracle, I mean like ancient Greek, like it'll tell you the future, it'll tell you everything. And servants, I mean like slaves, like people who will do whatever you want, including sexual things. So those are your choices, tools, oracles, and servants. Which one do you want to give to your kid?
None.
Well, you can give them tools. You can give them tools. Yeah, that was a sort of a setup. But my point is what we're doing here. So some people think AI is just normal technology and will incorporate it the way we did the printing press. I don't think so. I think this is more equivalent to aliens landing on Earth, and we're dealing with a new species we've never dealt with, and it gets twice as smart every 3 months. So I think this is something fundamentally new, fundamentally different. And we don't understand it. We literally don't know how it works. It writes computer programs. We can't understand it. All of our software will soon be written in a way that we can't debug it. We don't know what they're doing. So my view is we need to be techno-skeptical. We need to start from the assumption that technology is bad for children. I hate to say it because I'm a product of the 20th century. We love technology. But what we're seeing now, we have to start from the assumption that any new technology is going to be bad for children's development. They need to be with people and books and the physical world. That's what they need. And if you're going to put a new technology in, you better have strong evidence that it's helpful. Because tech industry, you're already 0 for 3 on social media, ed tech, AI so far. So sure, you can tell me about all kinds of ways that AI can be a tool. And if it's limited to really just a tool, then I can be sold on that. But anything about an oracle or a servant, no.
Mm-hmm. What about AI literacy, in a way? So we talk a lot about the debate in education is often like, teachers using the tools, or kids using the tools, or tutors replacing teachers. Is there room for teaching kids about AI, right? How the model learns and how text is converted into tokens and into sequence of numbers and how math is applied there? Because in a way, I kind of feel like, like driving, right? I want to be able to drive because it brings me value, and I don't need to be a mechanic and fix my car if it breaks, but I want to be able to change the tire if I need to, and I want to be able to know that the brake might fail if it's icy. So now with AI, I feel like, I mean, we can't ignore and pretend it's not in our lives. It's entered our lives in a way like social media, right? Faster than we can comprehend. And so, is there a place for literacy, or is that a screen too much?
Yeah. No. This is the dominant technology for the rest of human history. So they have to learn about it. But when do they have to learn about it? A lot of people have the idea that if we start them early, they'll end up further ahead. And that is completely not true. That was 20 years ago, we talked about digital natives. Oh, the kids are growing up with this, therefore their brains will be adapted, they'll be super smart. But they're not. Humans are getting less intelligent because of this. They're less capable. And so with most things, if you start them early, it doesn't mean that they will end up further ahead. With language, there are a few things, like language, yes. If you start your kid on Spanish or English early, yes, they will end up ahead. That's a special learning mechanism that we have for phonology. But if you want your kid to be successful in a digital workplace in 20 years, 15 years, the last thing you should do is give them a standard tech childhood, which will render them incapable or less capable of functioning. If you want to prepare your kids for the digital future, you have to protect them from the digital present. And at a certain point, maybe 13, 14, 15, let them learn all about it. But keep it the hell out of the first 10 years. That would be my view.
One more question before we turn to questions that were submitted by the audience, and that's why I'm checking my phone here and there. But I think this speaks to the scale of this moment. And so Pope Leo XIV, a month ago, released his first encyclical called Magnifica Humanitas, and he warns about the technocratic paradigm. And he opens the encyclical with the Tower of Babel. And I know it's a story of the Genesis that you've used a lot in your writings. I wonder if you drew inspiration.
I don't think he took it from me.
Okay. But given that and kind of the parallels between the encyclical and kind of some of your writings, I wonder if you could comment, perhaps share with the audience a little bit how you use the story of Genesis and what it means for you in terms of as a metaphor for technology.
Yeah. So I think in metaphors, and I've been trying, since things got weird in 2014, 2015, I've been like, how can we understand what's happening to us? Because this is something new. This is something we don't have. We can't look back in time and find, oh, but wait a second. Here's this amazing story in Genesis of the Tower of Babel. And God sees the humans after the flood. They build a city with a tower to reach unto the heavens. And it's an act of pride and hubris. And God is offended. And and he says, look at these people, soon they will be like us. And that happens a lot in the Bible. Like humans are acting like they're going to be godlike. And so God cuts them down, says, no, you're not gods. And so what God does, he doesn't knock over the tower. What he does in the story is he says, let us go down and confound their language so that they may not understand one another. And then, so imagine your city's in ruins and you can't even talk to each other because you speak different languages. And that's kind of what it's felt like, at least the world given to us by social media. It was supposed to connect us all, but in fact it's fragmented us into millions of little bubbles. So the title of my next book, which Roger and Planeta is going to publish, the title is Life After Babel, Adapting to a World We May Never Again Share. Because I don't think we'll ever again have a shared understanding of what's happening to us. And that's from social media. Now, AI is going to be basically like, we'll all be communicating with AIs, and it'll make whatever version of reality we want, but we won't share it with others. So I think it's a really frightening future for a very social species. And I was thrilled that Pope Leo engaged so deeply. And it was extremely long, so I didn't read it, but but I read about it. And he's trying to be open. He wasn't overly critical. I think he should have been more critical. So it is now a topic of public conversation. This is not just up to the tech companies. This is about the future of the world that we all live in, and it's changing very, very fast.
That's fascinating. So thank you for being so generous with your time tonight. I know you just landed today in extremis because your flight was delayed. John is going to be out here signing the book. His book is available for purchase. And thank you all for coming. I think we have homework cut out for us. So thank you for being here and hope you enjoyed it.